kick straight into the panel. Gina, can you do a little intro and tell us a little bit about yourself and what perspective you're bringing to the panel?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I'm a scientist at AgResearch, which is the pastoral Crown Research Institute. I've been there for the past 10 years in the environmental research team. I must admit, soil doesn't usually generate that much enthusiasm, so it's always a bit awkward kind of being in this situation where without these soil enthusiasts, it feels a bit strange, but wonderful. So I'm not claiming to be an expert in regen ag, but this is a topic we've been discussing a lot, and I just kind of wanted to contribute to the discussion from a research perspective. I do have a couple points to make, and it won't take long if I can just make those. Thank you. The first one is really just about the existing research and ongoing research that's happening in this area. It might not be labeled regen ag, but it's definitely relevant to what's going on. There's been a lot of work done on grazing and different grazing strategies, and the New Zealand's Grasslands Association for the past 50 years has been reporting on it. Unfortunately, it's probably more from a production and growing more grass perspective, and I think they would say, as Greg was talking about, trampling a whole bunch of grass is a fail and not a good thing. So all needs to be taken with a grain of salt, but I think there are some learnings in there that could be useful. At the moment, we have a sustainable farming fund project on what they call deferred grazing, which is exactly what Maya was talking about, letting the grass or the covers grow a lot longer than you normally would, showing that it leads to greater leaf area, reduced bare ground, and I'm not sure if you found this as well, Maya, but evidence of reducing facial eczema spore counts, which I thought was interesting learning from that one. The only other project I really wanted to highlight was a program that finished last year that was run by Darian Zed called Forages for Reduced Nitrate Leaching. So they were looking at some diverse pasture species such as plantain, and they were looking at it from the perspective of reducing nitrogen leaching, both from an intake. So some forages have lower nitrogen concentrations, so cows eat less nitrogen, which means less nitrogen comes out the other end, which can help reduce nitrogen leaching, but also from a pasture growing and uptake perspective. So some pastures are more active going into the colder winter seasons, which means they're still using nitrogen and nutrients to grow. And again, we've talked about deeper living pastures that can access more of those nutrients before they fall out the bottom of the system. And just to mention, we've also been collaborating with Whenua and Tahu on soil health indicators, Maori soil health indicators, using tools like we've seen, visual soil assessment, worm counts, and things like that. And then just the second point I wanted to make is about a project that I'm leading on the circular economy. So in terms of food systems, when we're talking about the circular economy, we're talking about practices that minimize the input of finite resources or virgin inputs like mineral fertilizers, encourages the use of regenerative ones, prevents the leakage of natural resources like nitrogen and phosphorus, and stimulates the reuse and recycling of resources in a way that adds value to the food system. And so one area that we're looking at is about closing the loop and bringing consumer waste back into primary production again by developing techniques to convert organic waste streams into a safe, manageable resource that can replace or displace synthetic fertilizers or unsustainable feed inputs. So I'm going to stop there because I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll especially be listening for some research questions that we might look at working on together in the future.
Great. Well, we've got a few prepared questions, but I actually think Chris has written the best question that's probably particularly poignant to a lot of the audience. I want to jump straight into that. And Chris's question is, we have to be able to have conversations around on-farm profit, costs and profit. My bank doesn't care about externals. I think that's a really nice practical way to frame things, particularly considering who's listening on the show. So might give this one to Maya first. Just if you can take us through some of the actual savings that you've made through the transition that are particularly resonant to you, and then maybe Gina as well, if you want to talk about that from a circular economy perspective, the fact that cost minimizations for mineral inputs and the like as well. So Maya, can you take us through some of the, put it this way, is your bank manager happier these days?
Yeah,
That's a good thing.
Yeah, we've got a big tax bill this year. So that tells you something about it. Our fertilizer costs have dropped by around 70 or 80,000 a year, and we're just so the biologicals I use, and we still use some nitrogen early spring. That is about half of what it used to be. So that's a big cost savings. And animal health has just dropped right out. Probably one of the biggest savings. Our imported feed is about the same. And our production has dropped a bit, but that's mainly because we went once a day, and that's a general trend that happens. It takes 4 years to get back to where you were, or just about where you were. But that brings cost savings as well through power and the rest of it. So when we first started on this farm, our farm working expenses were over $5, and in the last few years, around $3.50 a kilo of milk solids. So we're making the same amount of money as we were before, and when we get a good summer, we'll make more. I'm pretty positive about that. So yeah, that's on our farm though. I can't. It's hard to say. Our farm's not a beautiful flat Waikato dairy farm with 4 cows to the hectare. It's. I don't know how that would go on that sort of land, but I think it would actually be easier, personally. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Gina, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think the only point to highlight, I think as Maya already said, is that kind of critical transition period when you're trying to go from conventional to regen ag, that it takes a while for your pastures to adjust and stuff like that, and so it might be worse during that phase. But if you can get to the other side, like Maya has, and find a system that works, because you've seen it can be possible. Yeah.
Great. Ryland, do you might actually be able to add a point there? I know that Farmers Footprint is one of your sort of partner organisations, and I know that one of their activations is helping farmers work through that transition period by creating a little bit of support network around them. Have you found that's a key barrier to US farmers, is the fact that it's going to take 3 years to get back to where I was, or it's going to take 3 years or so to be profitable?
Yeah, I think that there has been a pretty consistent feedback trend that making the transition, there is a lull, but again, the folks, the folks who kind of guide from a farmer perspective, people like Dr. Alan Williams, continues to report, successful transitions and higher profitability, in 2 to 3 years in some cases, in some cropping systems. So yeah, I think there is a consistent lull in the transition. As far as the way Farmers Footprint, I'm actually not exactly sure how that program is working as far as helping farmers through that transition period. But I admire Farmers Footprint and all that they're doing, but I don't know exactly that program. So that's what I got to say about that.
Great. And having heard Greg's story and my story about sort of this transition that they've had to go through personally, and then the transition on farm, does that sound like the same story that US farmers are telling you?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It's both hearing and Greg, I mean, my heart was just like, I mean, just seeing how lit up they both got and seeing about what they're doing and how excited they are about what they're doing. I mean, that was by far my best, the most enjoyable part of this whole day was just seeing those two get lit up about what they're, and you know, that brings back again to my early interactions and mentorship with Graham Sate, hearing that what keeps him ticking is seeing farmers becoming alive as their land becomes alive, and yes, that the economics does work, and there's obviously some passion, inspiration, and conviction that carries over that rough period, but that, you know, at the end there is a place that people are, you know, landing similar to what Maya and Greg shared. So it is a consistent story that, again, it's very delightful to hear that same reflection here today.
And I wonder if we can tie this back to the earlier question. I want to come back to it because it was the predominant feedback that we got prior to the panel and the show. Is regenerative agriculture relevant in a New Zealand context where we haven't got significantly degraded soils? That's basically the question. And it seems like, I'm sure Maya and Greg would say, yes, it is, because it's not just about soils. I'm probably speaking for you guys, but pipe up if you don't agree with that. And so what I'm interested in is, if it's not just about the soils are degraded, so you've got to switch, it's about mindset, profitability, biodiversity, you know, just enjoying farming again. Is that a valuable piece of feedback to a farmer who's probably a little bit more reluctant to consider regenerative farming, that it's not just about soil, it's about a lot more than that? I'll give it to Ryland first, I think.
Oh, I was saying give it to Mia or Greg. I mean, I would say that we're all, I mean, you know, obviously we need to make money to pay the bills, but ultimately we want to have a fulfilling life. And I think, you know, when you start becoming connected to something, you know, you become more alive. And when you start to see life happen, you start to see your efforts creating an invigoration and, you know, a productivity that you haven't seen, and you start to make those connections, you feel like you're contributing to something, and that feels good. I mean, you know, when I was a restaurateur running restaurants, sometimes, you know, I got most lit up and excited when I got my compost right, and I was, you know, breaking down my compost pile, and I was just seeing this beautiful, you know, cycle of waste becoming this beautiful black soil, you know. And so when you start to be connected to life and the cycle of life, as well as it's, you know, paying the bills, I think, yeah, there is more than just making our soil healthy that's not as degraded maybe as US soils. I think, yeah, it becomes a whole experience of being alive and being connected to something and being connected to a purpose that, you know, lights you up. And I think we all want to be more lit up about what we're doing in life, and especially when it's helpful to our family as well as to our community, and even, you know, in the larger context, you know, contributing to, you know, we all want to be contributing to something bigger than ourselves. So I think it's a yes and it's yes to soils, it's yes to all that. But I'd love to hear the two farmers, their perspective.
Yeah, let's go back to Greg. Greg, you know, you're not a US cropper in Kansas. You're a sheep and beef farmer in Hawke's Bay. Why do you think that you can be you can have as much affinity with regeneration as someone who's probably, you know, at the point of crisis?
Yeah, I guess wherever you are, whoever you are, you know, around the planet right now, I think we're all searching for meaning and purpose. And I've heard regenerative agriculture described as a journey of self-discovery, and I think, you know, it is a personal journey, as well as which then you start to play out on your land and you know, in your community, and so I don't think you can divorce the two. And obviously I'm trying to see the big picture, environmental, energy, population, health issues out there. That's personally, I don't think it's like we've got a choice, but we have got an alternative option and direction of way to head. And so yes, it is profitable, and we must maintain our profitability. And as I said, we had a drought in Hawke's Bay last year. We don't use any nitrogen. We didn't buy in any supplements, and we had our most profitable year. While at the same time, we're doing something that we love and has meaning and is, that paradigm shift, which is, taking the planet from a degenerative trajectory to something that is regenerative. And what else are we supposed to be on this planet to do if it's not to regenerate it and learn and turn that cycle around? So I just think it's just such a super exciting time to be alive, and a real privilege to be a farmer. And we're just inviting as many people who want to come along on this journey with us and share it, because we can't do it all by ourselves. It takes a public that is aware of the issues and aware of the opportunity that regenerative ag possesses. So just super excited about it.
Nice. And sort of same question to you, Maya. I mean, Greg's been on this journey for a long time. You have, are sort of a few years in, and you mentioned before that your wife suggested on your first day that you sound like you joined a cult. So I'm interested to know, like, now that you're a few years in and you're probably starting to feel some of the stuff that Greg's talking about, do you feel like regenerative agriculture is a little bit of a cult, or how do you feel looking back on sort of the conventional mindset now?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting looking back. I mean, some of the things that we do as conventional farmers, or we used to do, when I look back now, I just think, oh, it's so backwards. And you're putting all this fertilizer on to grow grass. You get too much grass, so you have to mow that, and then because them paddocks are out, once you've mowed it, or the contract doesn't turn up on time, you mow that late, and then as soon as you've done that, a month later it gets a bit dry, you feed that back out. And now everyone does that in New Zealand. Like, that's just good practice. Now I look at things like that and I think that's crazy mad to be doing that sort of thing. I think regenerative farming, once you're into it, you're hooked. So that's pretty cool. I'll never go back to conventional farming, no way. And it's good for your mental well-being, I think. Well, for me anyway, and I know a lot of farmers out there, there's a heap of depression and anxiety, and it feels like everyone's picking on them and from all different areas, but that's all gone for me. I've got no worries with the environmental side of it. I've got no pressure. It's all, when I go down the pub, everyone's talking about, oh, greenies this, and you can't do winter crops, and you've got a restriction on nitrogen, and I'm just sitting there going, no, that's not an issue anymore. So that whole side of farming, that pressure is gone. Mentally it's really good.
It's a nice way to think about it, and it's to potentially answer the question right at the start, was it's not about necessarily waiting to get to a crisis point, whether that's an environmental crisis point or a farming business crisis point or a personal crisis point. It's just relieving pressure. And so you're right, there's so much regulation coming down. There is mental health issues in the sector. Some farms are struggling, we know that. And so if we've got this tool, and it seems to work, why not use it?
Yeah,
it's a good answer. I hope to my Twitterati that my rabid fan base that we've answered that one for you.
Let's just on that one. I guess the cool thing is it's not prescriptive. And that nobody, there is a whole range of techniques that you can use to. It's outcome focused, outcome based, and so I don't know any farmers that deliberately set out to degrade their land. You know, all the family farms I know want to pass the farm on to the next generation in better condition. But you know, I think we need some better measurement to draw that line in the sand, and then show that we are improving. You know, those various areas of soil, water, biodiversity, profitability, all that sort of stuff. And you know, where people are struggling, we can say, well, these are the options that you've got to turn that around. So, you know, I don't think it should be threatening to, you know, people that consider themselves conventional farmers.
Nice. That's a really good point about measuring and proving, and it's something else I want to come back to with Ryland about how potentially New Zealand farmers lead in the regenerative space. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the science behind measurement. So Gina, there's a really poignant question here from Michelle for you, which is how much research is being done to quantify the amount of carbon being laid down in the farms of successful regenerators?
I think that's going to be a bit difficult for me to reply to, because that's not my area. I'd say it's starting, but it's probably not as widespread as it needs to be. Soil carbon is kind of inherently tricky. It's quite fickle. It kind of comes and it goes, and what we're really looking for is that recalcitrant carbon that doesn't. It sticks around longer than other carbon, and it depends on the species, it depends on what's in there. And yeah, it's starting as Greg alluded to. There are some negative aging academics out there. We're all aging, unfortunately. But I think kind of related to your point before, there is that question about defining what is regenerative agriculture. And I think as a researcher, that's one of the things we kind of struggle with, is that it's hard to say it's X, Y, Z. And again, you could say it's about soil carbon, but as we just heard, it's about so much more than that. So as a researcher, it's kind of hard to pin down, and that makes it hard to measure all the different things that are meaningful about it. And again, as Greg said, it is the outcomes, and there might be a whole bunch of different pathways to get where you want to go. But yeah, it is a bit slippery.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, carbon's probably particularly difficult, but sort of from applying sort of this scientific mind to it, you know, we do need to measure these things so we can prove that progress is being made when we talk about it. What's probably the easiest parts of regen to measure, considering the tools that we have available? Like, you know, where is the scientific focus at the moment, and is it in the right place?
Well, we have some tools. I mentioned like the visual soil assessment, and I know that Jules at Integrity Soils uses that a lot. It's quite an easy measure. I mean, we're looking at easy measures, and I guess it's easier to track progress on a farm in a paddock because you can more clearly measure what's happening. It's the harder part, I would say, is saying what a healthy soil is, because it's going to be different for each soil. Maya's on pumice, which is one of those kind of weird soils that doesn't really seem to fit with any other patterns. We've also done work on peat soils. Organic soils are already high in organic matter, but just because of that doesn't mean they're necessarily healthy. So it's about trying to find appropriate baselines and trying to figure out what good is, that it's not necessarily comparable between soil groups and soil orders, because they're all very different, and that's something that makes it quite complicated, unfortunately.
Okay, great, thanks.
Farmers know, and you know, all that black soil that Maya was showing in those pictures, that's carbon, that's growing topsoil. You know, you can measure it all you like, but you know, you just know, Maya, that things are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, especially when it used to be quite a pale colour. There's no other answer really, is there?
Nice. That makes
Why
a
do
lot
we
of
try to
sense.
complicate it? It's
I totally get that.
People need proof. People need proof.
We want stuff to put in our models.
We want that premium. You want that premium, you've got to have proof. But I think that's one of the sort of the common pushbacks, is that if we can't define regenerative agriculture and we're struggling to measure it using traditional scientific tools, you know, it's an easy, I don't want to use the word excuse, but it's an easy excuse to not pursue and participate in on-farm regenerative practices. So one of the questions that always seems to come up on talks like this is, how do we define regenerative agriculture? And everyone does have a little bit of a different definition. So Ryland, I'm really interested in what your go-to definition for regenerative agriculture is.
Yeah, we've, you know, I think we've signed on to many, you know, versions that have been written and kind of put into public space, whether it was by Carbon Underground and the Coalition or Terragenesis. But I would say simply, you know, regenerative agriculture is an agriculture that is regenerating life, that there's a continuum cycle of more organic matter, more biodiversity, more ability for water to infiltrate. Yeah, it's, as Gina was saying, you know, it's very difficult to, because, you know, there's brittle soils and there's, you know, where there's, you know, there's so many variations. So it's hard to say what exactly the potential is, because the potential based on lots of factors varies. But again, I've, you know, similar to what Greg and Maya said, you know, and, you know, when people came after us early on, when we were talking about the carbon potentials and people just wanted to tear that down, you know, it was like, all right, well, even if carbon is a small component, everything else about it is a surefire win for all of life, including, you know, people who are eating the food, people who are growing. So, and I get that, you know, to get large scale momentum, we need to be able to move things, and we need to be able to measure things. I mean, you know, one of the things that is, you know, being developed from a technology standpoint that is happening, you know, in the US, and there's models looking at California, is, you know, the idea of using satellite technology to be able to measure, yeah, you know, what indicators and what is happening, ecosystem function, different factors of water, soil, organic matter. And again, it's still in the early stages of, you know, implementation, but there is some exciting developments in that realm that could be powerful tools for using the measurement of, for one, soil carbon in soils. And so that was a long answer to what my definition for regenerative agriculture is. So I'll shut up now.
Daniel, I'd like to say I've been asked to participate in a project which is being funded, I think, through, well, it's coming from the taxpayers. So they'll be testing my soil, grass, and the meat, and want to prove whether there is an advantage of what I'm doing that benefits the outcome, to say healthy soils, healthy grass, better meat.
I like the sound of that. That's got premium written all over it, Edgar.
Yeah, so basically that's starting shortly.
Good on you, mate. Good on you. And Ryan, that was a good answer, because, and it kind of goes back to what Maya was saying, is that, and what Greg was saying, because if each of your regenerative journey is different, and you're focusing on different things. Maya was obviously focusing on milk production and reducing animal sickness. Greg's focusing on rotational grazing and biodiversity. If that's your chosen part of the puzzle, it's easy to measure. I mean, Maya, you could probably rattle off your reduction in animal sickness right now. Like that's a really versatile measurement. Greg, I'm sure you can measure bird life or water retention or soil biology. So it certainly feels like the tools are out there.
Can I have 1 second?
Sure. Thanks, Sue.
I've been writing about soil in New Zealand farming papers for the last 5 years. I got into it partly because I met someone who was selling fertilizer that had mycorrhiza in it, but also I did one of Ryland's courses. I became an advocate of his a long time ago. And I have a lifestyle blog, not very big, but using mycorrhiza and bacteria on it, the production gets greater every year.
Sounds like regeneration. I like the sound of that.
Well, here I am in New Zealand doing it. I'm not doing it on thousands of acres, but I have been trying to get the message out. I wrote 6 articles for Farmers Weekly, all about the different stages of regeneration. And I just want to know that, you know, I care enormously about it.
Good on you. Thank you, Sue. I appreciate that. Let's finish with, I know we're a few minutes over time, but we had a few very technical questions, and let's just quickly run through them. So I'm going to throw them at you bit piecemeal. Number 1, Greg, do you mean that the drought did not affect you as much as your conventional neighbours? 30 seconds, go.
No, nothing like it. We were very fortunate, but also, you know, very sensitive to the tough times that they went through. But we had a big buffer with plenty of grass. You know, our system's based on growing animals all year round to supply butcher shops, and we continue to do that. So, yeah, very resilient.
Nice. Maya, how do you put in place your diversified pastures on steep country?
I'm lucky I've got a really big tractor and a big drill with drills on it. So that's how I do it. But I have succeeded before by just hand throwing out seed in front of cows and then high densitying it and get a good result in the autumn like that too.
Greg, have you reduced your stocking rate with regenerative agriculture?
The way, like I said, you know, our business is around supplying butcher shops all year round and growing dairy heifers all year round. And so therefore there is, you know, that balance between stocking rate and profitability. And at the end of the day, I don't get paid for how many animals I have on my farm. I get, you know, it's dollars per hectare at the end of the day. And I think a big mistake is people get, this is where humility and not egos get caught up and all about production and what you talk about at the pub. But the reality is how much money you bank at the end of the day.
Nice answer. Mike, can we get another 30 seconds on actually, let's talk about measurement and metrics. I'm really intrigued about the reduced number of sick cows on the farm after the soil starts to become more healthy. Maya.
Yep. And I was talking about metabolic problems after calving. So we have reduced, we've reduced it from out of 550 cows, we would have been treating 50 or 60 down to 2 or 3. And our in-calf, 6-week in-calf rate is probably one of the better ones in the country now. We don't use seeders. Our mastitis has dropped. Our cell count has dropped. We don't get many lame cows anymore, so that's dropped away. And our vet visits are count on your hand. So yeah, all over, it's just dropped away.
Awesome. And one for Gina. What is the piece of research that you're most excited about that's happening in the field?
Great question. But the most exciting research, I think, is what we're doing in the circular economy. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten out into the field yet. But we are working on a project looking at doing different stuff with grass, extracting stuff out of it, to kind of look at getting protein directly out of the grass, which is quite cool. To displace some like soybean as a feed input to systems.
So I think we lost you there for the last sentence. Give us one recap, but in a very loud voice.
Sorry, I know I do this. Yeah, no, there's a project we're looking at using pastures for alternative uses, not necessarily feeding them to cows, but maybe extracting out the protein and fibers and using them for different purposes and making different stuff out of them. So extracting the protein out, you can use that to displace imported soybean, for example, and reduce your carbon footprint on that for pigs and chickens and things like that. So we're quite excited about that.
Nice. And more uses for pasture.
Mm.
Nice one.
Great.